Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being a part of this student ministry e-course. Tonight is our last and final session in this particular installment of the student ministry e-courses. I have had a phenomenal time. We've had 4 classes. The first class was developing a dream team. The second class was leveraging resources. The third class was making disciples, and tonight is our final class, and tonight's class is on safe sanctuary. So again, I hope everyone has enjoyed themselves. I have enjoyed myself teaching the classes. It has been a stretch for me, but I have enjoyed the stretching. I have enjoyed preparing for these sessions. I have enjoyed the feedback. I have enjoyed the questions that have come as a result of you all being a participant in this class. As every week tonight, this class is being recorded so that we can share it with the other participants who are not on tonight. I am just, again, elated to each of you, and I want to say a special thank you to each of you for investing in yourself, investing in your ministries, investing in the areas that you feel God has called you to serve in. I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to coach you through this process, and I want everyone to know that I am here as a resource for you. So even as tonight is our last class, when this class is over, I am still there for you as a resource. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you want to talk through something as you're serving in ministry, as you're serving in your organization, as you're serving on your jobs, whatever you are serving, if there is something that sparks a thought because of something we've shared here that you want to talk through or want me to walk you through, please feel free to contact me. I have made sure I put my telephone number in every email. It's my personal telephone number, so you can always reach me there. It's not like some ghost number where I go check it periodically. But if you call me, I will answer and do my best to answer any questions or get you what you need. So again, thank you all so much for the investment in your time and your resources and wanting to just be better at what you do for God and what you do in your various organizations. So we have had persons on the call in the Houston area, New Jersey area. One young lady is now in the Chicago area, someone in the Atlanta area. So I'm really, really excited that this message is touching so many people. We will do some additional courses. This was my very first e-course, so you guys were something kind of like my test run to see how it works. We found this particular platform, Zoom, to be very easy, very user-friendly. I haven't had many user errors from myself or any of the participants with using Zoom. So we chose Zoom. God laid it on my heart to just share with the world the many things that I have learned over my years of doing student ministry, my years of doing ministry period, my years of serving the church and serving young people. There's a lot that I have learned over the years, and God has just placed in me to share as much of that as I possibly can. So this is one of the means by which I will continue to share. There are books inside of me. There are programs inside of me that I know that are coming out and that are being worked on so they can just help people. I believe that I have had all of the experiences that I've had because it's for somebody else. And I just think if I've had the mistakes, if I've had the experiences, if I've done it and done it wrong sometimes, and even sometimes done it right, people shouldn't have to knock their heads if I've already knocked mine, right? So you can ask me anything, and if it's something that I've experienced, or even if it's some way that I have a resource that I can connect you with a person. In my years of doing ministry, student ministry, I have met some of the world's most phenomenal leaders, some of the world's most phenomenal young people, and people who are experts in this area. So if there's ever anything that I can do, just let me know and I will be there for you. We're going to go ahead and get started with tonight's course. As I stated a little earlier, tonight's class is Safe Sanctuary, and it's pretty self-explanatory, the name, Safe Sanctuary. I know some of the others may have made you think a little bit when you think about the name. I know last week was Making Disciples, and we weren't talking about making disciples like making people look more like Christ, but we were talking about how do we duplicate ourselves? How do we duplicate ourselves, and how do we make disciples in our ministry areas or in our jobs or whatever your organization is. We were talking about how do we duplicate ourselves, and we talked about the process that Jesus used to make disciples, and it was a selection process, there was an impartation process, and then there's a delegation process. So it's very, very important that as we make disciples, as we duplicate ourselves, we have to be mindful on who we select. Then we have to make sure that we delegate, and that's a training process. That's making sure they have everything that they need, and that's empowering them to lead in your absence. And then, there's an impartation process. That's the teaching, the training, making sure they have everything, you empower them. And then there's the delegation process, where I now give you authority to do what it is that I have trained you and prepared you to do. So it's very, very important as we serve, as we lead. Even every volunteer, I believe, every volunteer is a leader. So there are no low-level volunteers that don't lead, because even the person who volunteers with picking up trash should have someone that they're leading, someone that they're pouring into, someone that they're training. So everybody should be training somebody. So it's always an opportunity to disciple somebody else in your area of ministry. So we should always look at it that way. I like to look at it as I try to work myself out of a job. And I do that literally. I do everything that I can to work myself out of a job. I want to train people with what I know. I don't want to keep it in my head so that I can have some power over other people, or I have the missing key. They don't know it. No, if you need to know it, if it's information that will help you serve better, help you lead better, help you train others, I want to make sure that information is given to you. And every person who serves in any organization or any ministry, they should always be training, teaching, and showing somebody else. Training, teaching, and showing somebody else. Training, teaching, and showing somebody else. So we have to remember that. So that was just a small recap on what we talked about last week, which was making disciples. Today, we're going to dig right into Safe Sanctuary. Safe Sanctuary, we may not go our entire hour. If we don't, it's fine. I'll take any questions at the end. I will definitely this week be sending out a survey to everyone who's taken the class, and please do me the huge favor of filling out that survey and sending it back to me. Just want to get your feedback, find out if it's something that we can do better. Again, as I've said before, this is our first e-course that we've done, and I have this privilege is just something that I didn't even realize would be so overwhelming for me, that people would invest in themselves and listen to me talk for 4 weeks. So I am excited about that. But I will be sending out a survey, and so I just ask that you please fill out the survey. The survey will ask you to write maybe a 1 sentence about the course, how it has helped you, how it has impact your life or impact your ministry or organization. And I just ask that you do that and send it back to me. And when you do, we'll use that information to make the course better. Also, as all of you are a part of the inaugural class, when I do classes in the future, if you would like to be a part of them, please know that I will make sure you can get those classes at a discounted rate. Any service or anything that I can offer, it is yours. Just let me know. And I really, really appreciate you. So let's get into Safe Sanctuary. Safe Sanctuary is one of my, is something very dear to me. For many years before I was full-time in ministry, before I started doing ministry full-time, I worked at an insurance company. I worked at an insurance broker. I worked at a few insurance brokerage firms. And the work that we did there is we assess risk. So that's what we did. We assess risk for our clients. So when I was in Houston, I worked for a major insurance brokerage firm, and we had major clients. And one of our clients was Waste Management. And if you've seen any green trash cans, it is a Waste Management trash can. We had security companies that were our large clients. We had various firms that were very, very great clients for us. But what we would do is we would spend hours and hours and hours assessing the risk for them. We would find where the risks were to make sure, one, they were insured for the risk and that they addressed the risks. The risk, R-I-S-K, risk, the risk. So we had to make sure they understood what the risks were that were involved in whatever type of business they were doing. It could have been a school. It could be a church. We wrote policies for churches. Any type of organization who needed insurance, what we would do is we would assess the risk for them. We would look through their organization. We would comb through, and we would figure out where are their risks at, where your company could be liable or your company could be at fault. And we would assess those risks, and we would make sure, one, they were insured for those risks, slip and falls and things like that. We would make sure they were insured for natural disasters. We would make sure they were insured. We would evaluate how many employees they had and things like that. So I spent many years working in the insurance industry assessing risk. So I have been trained to view things by assessing the risk. I don't drive into water because I assess the risk. Whenever it's high water, whenever it's raining and been raining for extended periods of time, no matter what city I'm living in, I'm examining the road to assess the risk and see if this water, how high the water is in front of me. Is it a puddle or is it a ditch? You know, I'm always trying to assess the risk. When I wear certain shoes, I assess the risk. Where am I going in these heels? Is it a pebbled ground? Is it going to be difficult for me to stay on my feet? I've just been trained to assess the risk. So that's what I did previously. So when I started serving in student ministry, I automatically would assess the risk. I was like, ooh, that's risky. So I remember being at youth ministry events when I first started serving in youth ministry, and we would have events for Halloween. We would have events, concerts, and things like that. And, you know, we were trying to be the really, really cool youth leaders. So we would do stuff like throw candy from the stage. Right? So I know you think that's cute because you've seen it somewhere. You've been to a basketball game and they threw T-shirts. So we would throw candy from the stage. We would throw T-shirts from the stage. We would, you know, throw a prize from the stage. And when I would see children trample on each other to get the prize, to get the candy, it never failed. I would cringe. I would cringe because all I could see was someone being hurt. I could see the risk that could potentially happen, and I could see the liability. Who's now at fault? If somebody's hurt, somebody's at fault, right? So I would cringe. So I had to stop doing stuff like that. I would tell people in my ministry, no, we don't throw stuff into the audience. This is not a controlled, and this environment is not controlled enough for us to do that because children will trample on each other. We would say things like the first person up here wins, and children will go running and somebody fall and somebody's shoe is untied. So those things would kill me. So, right. So for some kids, I was like the buzzkill youth pastor because I was like, there are some things we are not doing because I was always trained to assess the risk. So when I started doing student ministry full time, I always came in assessing the risk, trying to figure out what are the risks involved with us having God's children in our presence. What are the risks involved with us having my pastor's children in my presence? What are the risks involved with having parents who in good faith released their child to me? What are the risks involved in that? And so because I had that type of training, I started thinking about that a lot. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we assess the risks that's involved in the student ministry that we do. Now, what we have to understand is as leaders and as people who serve in student ministry, we have to think this way, even if nobody else thinks this way. Even if your pastor does not think this way, even if the parents don't think this way, as student ministry leaders, we have to think this way because the burden is then on us to keep the child safe. So typically, if you have a parent who comes to your youth ministry and they bring their child, if they're bringing one child, they really only think about the safety of them and their child. Most parents, if they have one child, they're really only thinking about the safety of their child. So they're making sure nothing's going to happen to their child. But if you're a student ministry leader, if you're giving oversight to 20 kids, 10 kids, 50 kids, 100 kids, 75 kids, 1 to 4 kids, however many kids, if they're not yours, if you're giving oversight to them, you have to be concerned about their safety. You have to be concerned about, is everything okay with them? You have to be concerned about how they came in and how they leave out, because you've now been given control over somebody else's property. So what happens when a parent drops their child off to children's ministry is they are asking you to hold their precious valuables. Right? So it's about like if I gave you my diamond and I said, hold this until I come back. My hope would be is that you would care for it. My hope would be is that you would be a good steward over it. My hope would be that you would make sure that it's returned to me better than the way that I gave it to you. It's kind of like the Bible story when Jesus tells the story about the people with the talents, and one he gave 5, the other he gave 3, one he gave 1, and how, in the Bible, the person comes back, the Lord comes back, and he wants to evaluate, what did you do with the talents? So one who had 5, he's like, hey, I saw that you gave me 5. I did everything that I could to multiply it. Here it is. I'll give it back to you and multiply it. But then there was the other one. He said, I'll give it back to you, multiply. But then there was the one who just had 1. And that one was not a good steward over the one thing that they were in charge of. They didn't work to protect it. They didn't work to make sure it was multiplied and better. They hid it in the ground because they didn't want anything bad to happen to it. So when we look at that as it relates to what we do in student ministry, we have to be a good steward over what's been placed in our hands. And one of the most important things that are placed in our hands as student ministry leaders are the children. The most important thing that's placed in our hands are the children. So we're going to talk about safe sanctuary. The word safe sanctuary is an overt expression in making congregations safe places where children, youth, and adults are safe. Safe sanctuary, it's an actual term. I spent quite a few years serving in a Methodist church, and we actually had an entire safe sanctuary curriculum. A part of our celebrations of disciplines in the Methodist church was we made sure everyone went through safe sanctuary training, where we made sure everyone was safe. And not only did they make sure children were safe, not only did they make sure youth were safe, not only did they make sure adults were safe, they had safety training for elderly, they had safety training for people who were handicapped. So they had safety training for everybody, so that the church was aware that it had a responsibility for everyone who came in to the church. Am I making sense to everybody? I'm gonna unmute you for a second. Maybe. Oh wait, my computer froze. Kind of, sort of. It don't want to work. It don't want to work. It don't want to work. There we go. So is everybody understanding? Is this making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So it's very, very, very important that we maintain a safe sanctuary. So again, the word safe sanctuary is an overt expression, and it's all about making congregations safe places where children, youth, and adults are safe. It's just all about making your congregation, making your church a safe place for children, for youth, and for adults. All right? So first thing we have to understand, who are we responsible for keeping safe? And I know I will talk a lot about keeping children safe because that's our primary thing, but we're also going to talk about keeping adults safe, and we're also going to talk about keeping the organization safe. So we have to figure out, who are we responsible for keeping safe? There are 3 groups of people that we're responsible for keeping safe. The first group are the children. We've been entrusted precious jewels, God's children, someone else's child, someone else's children. We've been entrusted children to watch over, to give leadership over. So we have to make sure we keep them safe. The second person that we have to keep safe is we have to keep the adults safe. And when I say adults, I'm speaking of volunteers and parents. Volunteers and parents. When I say keep the adults safe, I'm talking about the volunteers and the parents. And then we have to make sure, thirdly, that we keep the organization safe. And when we keep the organization safe, that's speaking to making sure that people will always and continue to speak well of whatever organization we are serving at that time or that we're representing. So we're keeping children safe, we're keeping adults safe, and the children are the children that are entrusted to us. If a child has not been entrusted to us, they are not our responsibility. If a child has not been entrusted to us, if there's not been a transfer of authority, that child is not our responsibility. As soon as there is a transfer in authority, and that's how we do that in check-in, when there's a transfer in authority, we are then responsible for the child. We're responsible for the child's safety and their well-being. And then at the end of the day, when there is another transfer of authority, then the parents go back to being responsible. So when we're talking about safe sanctuary, in this context, it's not for the entire church, it's for the peoples in our area. The area that you've been given leadership over, the area where you have your sphere of influence. So we're talking about people in that area. So children, these are children who you've been given direct leadership over. Then these are adults that you have been given leadership over, and these are your volunteers, and then these are parents. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you keep parents safe. And then the third person or the third thing that you're trying to keep safe is the organization. You have to make sure that the organization that you are representing, that you do things to make sure that they remain safe and that their name remains in good standing. What happens if the organization that you're working with and working for, they have a tarnished reputation where it involves dealing with children? It hinders what you've been asked to do. It hinders what you've been called to do. It hinders you being able to serve in that capacity. It hinders the work of the Lord. So we want to make sure that the organization that we're representing, that we're working for, or that where we're serving at, make sure that their name is protected and that their name stays in good standing. All right. So the first thing that you have to do, once you understand who you're protecting, or who you're trying to keep safe, you have to make sure there is a policy in place. All right. You have to make sure there is a policy in place. And these are the questions that you should go in asking. Right. And sometimes we'll definitely talk about working within the church. Sometimes in the church, there is this false sense of security that happens, right? Where adults will bring their children, drop them off, leave them in the room hanging out and not think anything about it, not think anything will happen, not think anything harmful will happen to them. There's this false sense of security until something happens. There's this false sense of security until someone is hurt, someone is injured, someone is abused. There's this false sense of security till something happens. But every organization should have a policy in place to handle situations that may arise. So you have to find out what's the policy in place so you can know how to govern yourself accordingly. If you don't know what the policy is, it's hard for you to enforce something that you don't know. So it's very, very important that you ask those questions. If you're serving in leadership, if you're serving in a student ministry area, if you're serving at a church, if you just got there, if you just started at an organization, it's very, very important that you understand what are your safety policies? What are your safety procedures? What are your safety protocols? What do you all have in place to keep people safe, to keep the children safe, to keep the adults safe, to keep the organization safe? You have to find out what's in place. So you have to find out the policy, and the only way you find that out is you have to ask the questions. Now, because there are some false senses of security in place in most church organizations, there may not be anything formal outside of insurance. But you have to push until you get those things formalized, until you get the documentations that you need. One, it helps us when we're dealing with other people. It helps us to be able to champion something when we know more about it. Takes us all the way back to our first class in developing a dream team. You got to know the vision. So you can't enforce, and here in Safe Sanctuary, you can't enforce a safety policy if you don't know what the safety policy is. Now, most churches, if they are a church of any size, more than 100 people, they have some certain insurances in place. And whoever their insurance broker is, I am sure they have taken into consideration Safe Sanctuary, or how to keep us covered from incidents, injuries, and circumstances. Right? So there's 9 times out of 9, there is some insurance in place, but that insurance does not speak to the policy to keep people safe in your organization. It doesn't speak to what we consider unsafe behavior. It doesn't speak to our rules and regulations about background checks. It doesn't speak to what we want to make sure we're getting out of everybody and what we're doing. So you have to make sure those policies are in place. And if you're serving in the area and those policies aren't in place, you should champion the cause. What do we need to do to make sure we have some things in place? Because it not only helps the organization, but it also helps you as a leader. Because again, you're one of those adults that we're keeping safe. Volunteers or a worker of the organization. At some point, you are identified in the 3 people that we have to keep safe. You're either a volunteer or you are a part of the organization, and the organization represents you as well. So you have to make sure you find out what that policy, and if they do not have a policy, you should be willing to champion the cause of figuring out how do we get some things in place, some things in writing that says this is what we do, this is how we address any unsafe behavior, this is what we consider unsafe behavior, this is how we address it, and this is who we're keeping safe. You got to make sure you outline all of those things, all right? So you have to know who you're keeping safe. You're keeping safe children, adults, and the organization. But then you have to know how. You have to know what policy is in place here at this organization that will make sure we're able to do what we do. You can't allow the idea that this place is so safe because it's church or whatever, that nothing will happen here. You have to go in thinking something bad could happen. So because I was trained to assess risk, I'm always kind of that guy who's like, let's not do that. We got to keep the children safe, or it puts the church in jeopardy. And I'm always the one who's going to bring up what could happen. Now, the great thing is God's grace, his love, it covers us, it shields us, it protects us. The Bible lets us know he's looking out for fools and babies, and many of us fall in either category at some point or another. But so he covers and he watches and he looks out for us. And so sometimes churches can get so accustomed to nothing happening that they kind of hang their hat on nothing's going to happen. But as we see with tragedies in our world, areas that have never flooded have flooded. Places that have never received harm have received harm. Things that we thought would never happen, are currently happening in our world. So we have to make sure we don't just think just because it hasn't happened that it can't happen. If it can happen, it can happen. And you have to think about it like that. All right? So you have to find out the policy. What is the policy? That policy should also include how we report unsafe behavior. You have to make sure that policy includes how we report unsafe behavior. So in the event you are experiencing a child who's reporting something that happened to them, you need to be able to know in that policy, it needs to tell you, what do I do to report unsafe behavior? What do I do? Not just if it's abuse, but what if a child gets hurt? Or what if a child hurts another child? Or what if a child hurts an adult? What if a child hurts the organization or hurts the building or hurts someone else? We have to know how, so that policy is going to speak to how you report things. The policy is going to first identify what is an unsafe behavior, right? It's going to identify what's unsafe, what's considered not safe for us as an organization, what is a risk involved in us doing what we do. The policy will identify every risk involved in us doing what we do. Every risk should be outlined in the policy, and not just outlining the risk by acknowledging them, but also what you do if you experience that risk. If you experience the risk of a teacher passing out, what do you do? If you experience the risk of a child smashing their finger in the door, what do you do? If you experience the risk of a parent who was not authorized to pick up a child, if you experience them coming to pick up a child or coming in that space, bringing negative energy and attention to the children's ministry area, what do you do when you have instances like that? All of these things should be outlined in a policy so that the workers are aware, so everyone knows how we address any unsafe risk, right? So you got to make sure if you're serving in an organization where there is no policy in place, champion the cause to make sure that we get a policy in place, because that policy will help you in your operations. All right? So we're going to talk about really quickly the 5 things that you do to make sure you keep your children's ministry area safe. All right? Talk about the 5 things that you do. There are 5 things that you need to know to make sure you're keeping your children's ministry area safe. After we talk about those, then we're going to dig a little bit into knowing the laws of your state and things like that. Okay? So the first thing that you have to do, a way that you keep your area safe, is one, you have to do background checks. You have to do background checks. Every volunteer who signs up to volunteer in your in children's ministry serving with students should have a background check. Now, a policy that should be included in your policies about safety is how often you'll do that background check. So what happens is somebody starts serving in student ministry and they get a background check. 2 years later, they're still serving. Nobody has gone back to redo that background check. But your church should have a policy on how often we do background checks, how often we redo background checks, because some people get into student ministry and they never leave, which is fine. If that's an area where they feel passionate about, an area where they want to serve, that's great. Some people can serve for many years at a time, but we have to make sure that that person's status has not changed while they've been serving, because many things can happen in a span of time. And it may not directly affect my ability to do what I do, but it may affect my ability to do what I do. It may not affect my desire to do it, but it may affect my ability. That's what I want to say. It may not affect a person's desire, but it may affect their ability. So if I were to be serving in a children's ministry area and I get a background check in 2015 and in 2016, I am found negligent for spanking my own children. Or something. And all of this is hypothetical because I don't have any children. But if I'm found to have put a child in harm or done something that should not allow me to be serving with children, I need to have that background. That could happen in 2016. Well, in 2017, if the organization doesn't go back and do another background check, they will never be made aware of something being now on my record that would keep me or prohibit me from being able to serve. It may not take away my desire, but it may take away my ability. So we have to make sure, there are certain things that are just considered where adults should not interact with children. And it's not always where a person has been, and it doesn't always deal with abuse. It's not always abuse. There are other behaviors and situations to where the recommendation may be, we may not want this person serving with children at this time. So you have to make sure you're doing a background check on every volunteer. Like, no, I don't care if it's your friend. I don't care if it's somebody you know, they work at a school. In my years of serving in student ministry, I've been able to engage with a lot of educators, people who work in education, and many of them have to have background checks for their job. I can't take for granted that that background check is current. I have to make sure I look outside of the scope of my friendship with this person, or I look outside of the scope of what I know about this person, and I make sure I do my due diligence and get a background check on everyone. But then I have to make sure that I've learned the policy for the organization that I'm working with on how often they want background checks done, how often they do it, because when I know that, it keeps us safe. It makes sure we are aware that a background check is going to happen every 2 years. So it makes sure we are aware of what's going on in people's lives. Is that making sense to everybody?
Yeah.
I love the just yes. I love it. I love it. All right. I just want to double check and make sure I'm not just, anybody have any questions so far?
I think I need a background check for Kingdom.
Great. See, some people remember it's been, I haven't had one since I started, or I'm not sure if I ever had one. It's very, very important that we make sure everyone serving has a background check, a current background check. But there has to be a policy in place. And how often do you do it? People need to know. If you're leading an area, you need to know how often. And that's information that you can share with new people who are coming on board. We send out applications and things like that, send out that background check and let people know every 2 years, that background check is done again. We get people to fill it out. Sometimes they may have a change in information, but we get people to fill those out so that we can make sure we have the most accurate information about every individual that's serving in our children's ministry. The next thing that we have to do, another way that we keep children safe, is through the check-in and check-out policy. This is where we reduce the risk of losing a child. We reduce the risk of placing a child in the hands of a wrong person. So it's important that you have a thorough check-in and check-out process. It's very, very important that you have a very thorough check-in and check-out process. So most churches, they're now using maybe the electronic check-in system. And some people think we just use it just so that we can use up a bunch of stickers. And put stickers on kids' clothes and ruin their cute little outfits that their parents put on them for Easter. But we do that. It's another way that we keep children safe, because through that electronic check-in system, one, we can tell how many children we have on our facility. We can tell where every child is at our facility. We can also tell if a child has an allergy or if a child has a disability. Then we can also tell who's able or who's an approved person to pick up or drop off the child. So we don't just do, parents are like, I just got to wait for that sticker. You know my child, so you get these parents because they know you. You know them, go ahead, sign them in, go ahead, or they'll just send anybody to pick up their child. They don't keep the sticker, things like that. the reasons why we do it is so that we can keep the child safe, we can keep the adult safe, and we can keep the organization safe. How do we keep the child safe with our check-in and check-out process? We know how many kids we have in our facility, and we know where they are. It's important that we know where students are. That's why you have to make sure your systems are up to date so the kids are going where the computer says they are. So whatever parent comes and there's an emergency and they need to take their child, because you have to think you have to think in the context of my organization growing, and it's not just one class of kids, it may be 10 classes of kids. So if a parent comes to the check-in area and it's like, oh my God, we have a family emergency, we have to leave, I need my child. Well, it may not be a child that you know. So you go in your system and you put in the child, Cherie Johnson, and it says she's in the 1st and 2nd grade, which means she's in class 1 with teacher Michelle, and you can then send that parent, or you can go to that classroom. Well, sometimes if our systems aren't up to date, it may say Cherie's in the 1st and 2nd grade class, but Cherie may be in the 3rd grade. And because she's in the 3rd grade and she wants to be with her right class, she's going to walk herself to the 3rd grade and be in that room, and we have her listed in the 1st and 2nd grade. That makes the organization look bad, because a parent is saying, well, I thought you said my child was in classroom 1. Well, now my child's in classroom 3. That's why it's very, very important that you do the check-in process is clear, that everything is up to date, the class rosters are up to date, teachers know who's in their classroom, who's supposed to be in their classroom, because in the event there's ever an emergency, we need to know where a child is at every point. If a child reports some abuse, or a child reports bullying, or a child reports that something happens, we need to know what room that child was in. So we can go in our system and we'll say, oh, this child was in classroom 1 on October the 8th. The child was in classroom 1. The teacher was Michelle Stewart. She had 17 other students in that class. So now we can question Michelle, and we can question the 17 other students in the classroom. So if that student is saying that a student from another classroom was rude or mean or bullied them, we now know we have to try to figure out, how did that happen if they were in 2 separate classrooms? Then we can say, did that happen in large group? Did that happen at a bathroom break? Did that happen at check-in? Were they in our custody when that happens? Because things can happen that are outside of the scope of what we're supposed to be doing. Again, when that transfer of authority is given to us, then we're responsible. When we give back that authority, we are no longer responsible. Case in point, last week, we had a very small incident. 2 students outside of our Tuesday night class. Class was over. The kids were released to their parents. They kind of had a little get into it moment, right? A little small, minor, get into it. I'm not feeling you. But I knew from class that something had begun to be fueled between the 2 of them. We separated them, made sure they were apart. But after the authority was transferred back to the parent, there was some sort of incident or altercation. That's a moment where the parent has to be involved. Now, if it happened within the scope of what we were doing with them, then I would have had to be involved. But outside of that, the parents then have to deal with that. But we have to make sure we have good documentation of where kids are, what they're doing, when they're doing it, so that we can make sure we're keeping the child safe, we're keeping the adult safe, and we're keeping the organization safe. All right? So you have to have a great check-in and check-out policy. Check-out is just as important as check-in. Some people overdo it on check-in and do nothing at check-out. Checkout is just as important as check-in, because at checkout, we need to make sure these kids are leaving with the right people. We need to make sure the parent is the right parent or guardian is picking up the people. We need to make sure that the numbers on their stickers match, so that we can make sure this child is going with the right person. I've had one experience with a parent who was no longer authorized to have the children, was trying to pick up a child. But those things can't happen. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that it can't happen. So we always have to assess the risk. Assess the risk. Yes, ma'am. You can unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So how do we find out things like that? Like authority of who's able to pick up and drop off? Is there like a form or something? Because I've never, like with our system, I've never seen like guardianship section of who is allowed to pick up and drop off the kids, just so that way we can maintain safety?
So what's a typical rule of thumb is if the person has the sticker, they've been given authority, but we usually run into this when someone comes to pick up a child and they don't have a sticker at all, right? So then you ask the question, who are you? And what you should be doing is going in the system to make sure that person's name is there. So for most people, like when I put a person in CCB for Change Church, I usually will put the mother and the father. So I know I at least have two people in there. So if this person picking the child up is not listed in there, I'm gonna start asking some questions. So you typically would just see who's the guardian, who's the head of that household, because depending on what system you use, I've previously used a system called KidCheck. And KidCheck would allow you to put it in there like approved guardian or person to pick up the child. But I know with CCB, it just has like head of household. So that's why it's very important that we continue to encourage parents to keep that information up to date. Like whoever sets up, like let's say for instance, let's see, one of the ministers at the church, Quincy Carter. So Quincy Carter has 3 children and they're all listed in CCB. They're listed as a family, right? So you'll see Quincy, you'll see his wife Shan, then you'll see their children. You'll see children that are listed under them. Well, if somebody else comes and says, oh, I'm picking up Cameron and I'm picking up Kayla and I'm picking up Shane, and I don't know them, they're not Quincy and they're not Shan, and they don't have a sticker to pick them up, I'm going to then ask some questions. Well, who are you? Oh, I'm their grandmother, or I'm their auntie. And they may know that auntie and they may know that grandmother, but I need to make sure that authority has been transferred for them to pick it up. So it may mean texting a parent, calling a parent, or something like that to find out. Because they may say, oh, their mom, they left already, they're going to ride home with me. Well, that information needs to be given to me so I can make sure I'm keeping the child safe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. Is there a way for like parents to communicate those type of changes? Like, how would we set a system like that up? Because like you said, last minute changes, like, for example, Remind had to leave early on Sunday and Zoe's sister picked her up, but she didn't have her ticket because Remind didn't leave it. So it's like, how would we handle that properly and make sure the transfer is right? Especially because I've never seen the sister, or it's like it's a child that's new, so we don't know to whom they belong just by looking, or it's a new teacher, so they don't know. It's like, I don't know.
There are ways. So you have to train the people you're serving to work with your system, but you got to have a policy in place, right? So the way that you train them to work with your system is along CCB, along with KidCheck and many others. These are all online programs that the individual can set up their own account, right? So what Remind should have done, since this is a real life situation, she could have gone in CCB on her phone and added her sister to her list of people in my household.
Okay, yeah, it's her daughter. Yeah, okay.
Her daughter. She could have gone in and added her as people in my household. Then we could have gone in the system. And I mean, it doesn't happen seamlessly. And again, these are things that we have to train our staff, we have to train our parents, and we have to continue to put this in front of them, let them know this is important to us. We need you to do this. Make sure every year you're updating your information, updating your telephone number, updating your, how we get in touch with you. Because if they have old phone numbers in there and we're texting them, they're like, oh, my phone number changed. Well, I didn't know. So we have to stay on them with updating. So each student ministry area should have some system in place where every year we're doing a blast to parents. Make sure you're updating your information. Make sure you're updating your email address. Make sure you're updating. So there should be a time of the year. You can do it. You can pick a time, but usually, around when school is starting, because the schools are asking you for updated information. It may be cool to do a little, what's the word I'm looking for? do a little campaign. That's the word I want. Do a little campaign with the parents around the same time school is starting. Or you may choose to host an open house event with all parents once a year. And in that once a year open house event where you tell them all about your ministry, what we're doing for the year, how we plan to affect children, what kind of curriculum we're using. During that time, you can make sure you're getting updated information. So you got to always make sure you're getting updated information and you tell the parents what I need to know. So when I used to serve at a church in Houston, we used KidCheck, and KidCheck was very user-friendly. All you have to do, if you had a change, or let's say somebody else needed to pick up the kids, you can just go in KidCheck and make a change and say such and such is going to pick up the kid. Or you can make the people aware when you drop your child off. That's why we have coordinators. That's why we have people who are like the point person for the day, or people in check-in. And parents need to get used to letting people know, not making these arrangements. Because what happens when your child's in daycare? I have two sisters and a brother. I have three sisters and a brother. Three sisters. I forget I have another one. I have three sisters and a brother, and I have a ton of friends with kids. And all of their children have had to go to daycare at some point. And at some point, for the most part, I've had to pick up somebody's child from daycare. They cannot forget to tell them that I'm coming. Because if they forget to tell them that I'm coming, that baby is being left in daycare. Somebody's getting an additional fee, or somebody's getting some phone calls. So just the same way that they have to remember at the school, I've had to pick up nieces and nephews, godchildren from school, from wherever. My name has to be put on there, and they have to be made aware. Even at the school where my nephew attends in Houston, my name is on the list as a approved person to pick him up, but my sister has to make them aware if today is something different than our normal process. Because the normal process is he waits till the end of the day and then he goes outside and stands in the car line. Well, if the process changes, and it has changed many times, I've gone to Houston, needed to pick him up early for my sister, or we're doing something family related. If I have to go in the school to pick him up, they need to have been notified that I'm coming. The same thing with church. But what happens is, because nothing has happened, everybody thinks nothing's going to happen. But we got to train people. We have to own our area in such a way that we say, I'm going to champion the cause to make sure we get this right. Because if something happens, people are looking back like, y'all didn't have nothing in place. So it's very, very important. And so many things happen in children's ministry. We're always constantly moving. Something is, always changing and trying to stay abreast of everything. But we got to make sure we stay abreast of safe sanctuary rules, policies, and procedures. All right? Does that help a little bit, Michelle? Okay, awesome. So the checkout process is just as important as the check-in process. The checkout process is just as important, so we have to make sure we have right systems in place. You got to tweak them. You got to watch them. You got to see them to make sure you have the right system in place to make sure children leave with who they're supposed to leave with. I've had instances where you open up that door in a pre-K class and you see kids see their mama down the hall, they will take off running. So if you have incident like that, you may need to change the type of door that you have. You got to think through what are the processes that we need to put in place to guarantee that we keep children safe. What are the processes that we put in place that we keep children safe? So check-in process is very important. It reduces the risk highly of us losing a child, of a child being injured, and also a child being given to the wrong person. Check-in policy, check-out policy. So background checks, then your check-in and check-out policy. The third thing is well-trained volunteers. How do you stay safe? You have to have well-trained volunteers. One of the most reasons, and I may not have said that correctly, one of the highest reasons why volunteers leave children's ministry is they're not prepared. I've asked people all over the world. When people step away from children's ministry, one of the highest reasons why, not the highest, but one of them. Some people are burned out. Some people are they're in a different season. Some people, they can't juggle it in their schedule. They can't prepare. But one of the high reasons are people are not prepared. People don't feel prepared. And because it's an ever-changing area, it's easy to not feel prepared. So as leaders, we have to make sure we're constantly training our people well. well-trained volunteers. They need to know the safety protocol. They need to know how we handle kids that are unsafe, how we handle kids with issues, how we handle kids that have been injured, how we handle kids that are acting out, how we handle kids with behavior issues. All of those things should be listed in your policy so that that volunteer can be well-informed how to govern themselves. But what happens is every week you're getting a new situation, and that volunteer is giving us some more information this day and more information this day, and another day they get something else and something else changes, and they're like, you know what, this is just kind of a lot, and I don't feel prepared, and I don't want to do it. Because most volunteers are like, I'm really just volunteering. I work a job. I'm in the workforce. I work in the marketplace. I don't want to do all of this. So we have to make sure that they're well prepared, that they have everything they need. They have the policies outlined, the procedures outlined, everything that we're going to do. This is how we keep people safe. This is how we keep them safe. All right. The fourth thing is a clear plan and procedure. You have to have background checks. You have to have an impeccable check-in and check-out process. Then you have to have well-trained volunteers. Then you have to have a clear plan and procedure. You have to be clear for everybody. Is it written on the wall? What do we have that shows people what our plan and our procedures are? Our safety procedures, our evacuation procedures, our procedures of if a student is hurt. We have to have very clear plans and procedures. What do we do? Who's notified? Who does it? If a teacher doesn't know that a coordinator is the person who they take their concerns to, a teacher will have something happen in their class. They'll walk out the class trying to go find somebody to help them when all they had to do was ask the coordinator. But if they don't know that, they're going to think, well, these kids are in my protection or my safety. Then they leave them unsafe and they walk out and they go and try to find the answer to their problem. When they have to know, it has to be a clear plan, a clear procedure in place so that people can know what to do. The Bible says, write the vision, make it plain. So when others read it, they'll see it and they can run with it. People can't run with it if it's not clear. It has to be a clear and concise plan and procedure for how we keep students safe, right? The last thing is have a watchful eye. You have to have a watchful eye. You have to understand your volunteers and you have to keep a watchful eye for things that may need to be tweaked. So in the background check, you got to have a watchful eye, watching my volunteers, paying attention to the amount of time it's been since I've done a background check, the check-in and the checkout process. You got to keep a watchful eye to make sure it's running smoothly. And if there are glitches, that we address those glitches, like the one Michelle addressed, we're not knowing who's picking up a child. That needs to be addressed. Parents need to be made aware. These are things that you need to do. These are things that you need to make sure are in place if you're going to have someone else picking up your child. Well-trained volunteers. If it seems like volunteers are confused or if you got a lot of new volunteers, you got to keep a watchful eye, paying attention to what's going on so you can know when you have to go back and do that training, when you have to go back and do that instruction. And then you have to make sure you keep a watchful eye on the plan, because when the organization changes, something should change in your structure. So when the organization, if there's a large organizational change, there should be a change in what your structure or what your procedures are, because the changes there should always reflect changes in your area. So if there's an additional service added, there should be a reflection in your plans and in your procedures. If there's a service taken away, there should be additional plans in your procedure. If there's a new building added, if there's a new room added, if there's a new class added, all of those things should have a bearing on what's happening in children's ministry if children are being affected by it. All right? So you have to make sure, how do we keep them safe? We make sure we have our background checks. You have to figure out within your policies and procedures how often that should happen. The check-in, the check-out process is very important to keeping children safe. It reduces the risk. You have to have well-trained volunteers. Then you have to have a clear plan and procedure in place. You got to be clear. And then you have to keep a watchful eye, paying attention to what's going on. You have to pay attention to those policies and procedures so you can know when they need to be tweaked. Something that I noted is nothing is more important than the security of God's children. Nothing is more important. When those children are in our care, nothing is more important than the security of those children, making sure they're safe, making sure they can receive the word of God in a safe atmosphere where they can then be changed. Because if they're not safe, they can't be changed. And if them being changed is the goal, we have to make sure that those children are safe. Does all of that make sense to you guys? Any questions, any comments? Coolio.
No, that makes sense.
Makes sense. All right. One last thing I want to touch on, and then if there are any questions, I'll take those. And then if not, we will end our final session tonight. One last thing that I want to touch base on, and that is after we understand who we're keeping safe, then we have to make sure we kind of dig into that. So when we're dealing with children, so keeping children safe, we're keeping them safe in our custody, and we're making sure we're able to report anything that could potentially have happened to them. So that's why it's very, very important that you know, or that the youth leader in your area is aware of the laws in your state that you're working in. There are reporting laws that you have to adhere to. As a minister, as a licensed ordained minister, there are reporting laws that I have to adhere to. So when I talk to children, if I talk to children outside of the presence of a parent, if it's a counseling or a conversation that I'm having with them, I let them know whatever you say to me stays between me unless it's something that I am by law required to report. And we have to understand that. I know Michelle is an educator, so you know there are some things that are by law you are required to report. As a volunteer, one of the things in your policies that your organization should outline are the things you are by law required to report. There are things that you should be by law required to report, and you have to know what those things are. And you have to know how to look for those things. And if a child reports that something has happened to them, we need to know who we report to and how we report. Because when we don't know who we report to, if we report to the wrong person, we could be at fault. And you may think you're doing a great thing, but if you report something that was reported to you as a person who was given authority over a child, because there's this transfer of authority that happens, if you report to the wrong person, you're at fault. You've exposed a person's information unnecessarily. So you have to make sure wherever you're serving, wherever you're working, that you understand the laws in the state that you're in the organization that you're in. Make sure those things are clearly outlined. If in the event that something is reported to me, who do I report to? And, if it's in a church setting, it's not that you report to an usher. You probably need to report directly to the campus lead of that particular church or the senior pastor, business executive, or something like that. But there's always a chain of command, but you need to be made aware of that. You need to be made aware of that so that you are aware of how you need to proceed, all right? The last thing is we're keeping children safe. So we have to know they report something, how we report it, but also in keeping adults safe. One of the ways we keep adults safe is we monitor our class-student ratio. Class-student ratio is very, very important. I know it's sometimes hard to keep the ratio. I know it's sometimes difficult when you have low volunteer participation and high student participation. And it happens in organizations. But we have to make sure people who we report to understand that that is a part of keeping the adults safe. If you have an adult with 25 toddlers and one adult, that adult is not safe. The children aren't safe and the adult is not safe. An adult can trample on the child, and then that puts the adult's ability to do what they do in jeopardy. Being behind closed doors with children are things that making sure you have clear line of sight with certain age children in certain rooms. That's something that keeps adults safe. I don't counsel children with doors closed. I don't counsel children in hidden places because I want to make sure there's always a clear line of sight or there are other people around so that I can make sure I can always do what I've been called to do. We have to make sure we keep the volunteers that we serve with and that serve under us and sometimes we are that volunteer, that we do everything to keep ourselves safe. You know, sometimes volunteers, they build rapport with children, but we have to make sure in our training, we show them how we keep them safe by making sure they know. We don't do a lot of extra hugging and picking up and kissing and rubbing on kids, because we want to make sure you are able to continue to do what it is that you feel you've been called to do. But any allegation of misuse of trust with a child prohibits you from doing something you feel that you've been called to do. So we have to make sure when we're training adults that we make sure they understand. Not only do we want to keep this child safe, but we also want to keep you safe. We want you to know that there are certain behaviors that we expect out of you and certain behaviors that we don't want exhibited in this area, because it could eventually prohibit you from doing something you feel you've been called to do. And the last thing is how we keep the organization safe. When someone speaks ill of the organization where we serve or where we work, they're speaking ill of us. So we have to make sure that the people who we serve under, the people who we serve for God, but the organization leaders, that they know safety is at the top of your mind, right? And that's why we're going to champion those causes to say, if there's no policy in place, I need to be a part of putting the policy in place so I can make sure I'm safe, the children are safe, and this organization is safe. Because you don't want your church to have a bad name or your organization to have a bad name because we didn't have a policy in place to address safety issues. So it's very, very important. We keep the child safe, we keep the adult safe, and that we also keep the organization safe. One last thing about keeping adults safe, something I forgot and I missed it here on my notes. With keeping adults safe, in the event that you have children who have behavioral issues, when we have students that have behavioral issues, it's very important that we make sure parents make us aware of that, because that also goes into keeping adults safe. Because if you have kids with behavioral issues, they could potentially harm an adult. So at our Ewing campus at Change Church, we have a couple of our seniors, some of our seasoned saints, some of our prime timers that volunteer in children's ministry. One in particular, Miss Frankie. And Miss Frankie is older. Miss Frankie is a wonderful woman, but a child with behavioral issues could cause a problem for her if she had to try to manage them. So we have to make sure we're keeping an eye out for kids with behavior issues, and that we're letting parents know what behaviors we will not accept, what behaviors we will not allow to be in our space. That should be in your policies as well. Anything that is a risk, children with behavior issues are a risk. Anything that's a risk should be listed in your policies so that parents know if my child has a behavior issue, they may get the call that when they call me out of service, they may be asking me for my child not to return, because we want to make sure that the adults are safe as well. I think that's all for tonight. We need to know how to report anything, any unsafe behavior that we are made aware of. We need to make sure that we're following those 5 things that keep us safe, having background checks, making sure we have a policy for our check-in and our checkout, the procedures and policy in place to help us reduce any risk, make sure that volunteers are well trained on our procedures, what they need to do. They need to be abreast of anything that changes, things that they need to know. Make sure there is a clear and concise plan and procedure in place. And then we have to be mindful to keep a watchful eye so that we can see when we need to make those changes. Again, when we're talking about safety, we're not just keeping children safe, we're keeping children safe, we're keeping adults safe, and we're keeping the organization safe. We're not just keeping children safe. We're keeping children safe, we're keeping adults safe, and we're also keeping the organization safe. Well, I think that is all that I have for tonight under Safe Sanctuary. We have gone a little bit over our hour. It is now 8:09, but that's okay. We have the time to use. So I want to ask, are there any questions on the line tonight about anything I've said? Anybody have anything you need any clarity on? Again, I am here as a resource, and I'm here for you. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of like change all of that information.
Say that again.
Where do we find all of that information? Like all of our policies, behavior, check-in, check-out, how to handle parents, like where is there a central location?
So what you have to do is you have to get with your student ministry leader. and find out if there's a policy in place. And if there's not a policy in place, that's why I say if there's not a visual policy in place or something they can go and grab, sometimes it may mean you need to champion, okay, what we need to develop that. Because before we can move on, we got to make sure we have that in place so people know how we operate and how we deal with issues regarding safety.
Okay.
So those are just questions that you have to ask the organization those kind of questions. And if you're leading in an organization and you may be the person at the top of the leading of that area, then you find who's leading you. What are our safety protocols? How do we, where do we have this information at? And if we don't, how do we go about putting those things in place so that we can know? And again, for most organizations, they have insurance, right? There is some insurance that may outline, because some insurance risk assessor has come in, they've sold them some insurance, they made sure they're fully insured for incidents and things like that. But we need policies in place so that people know how to govern themselves and what to do in the event that we find ourselves in a situation where we're dealing with an unsafe scenario. Any other questions? But that is a good question. So you have to ask.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My question is, how can we incorporate security of our church to help facilitate our safe sanctuary for student ministry? For example, where I work, sometimes we have people. I work in the neighborhood, and people from that I serve or used to serve will come to church, and sometimes they don't leave our program on the best terms. And I ran into somebody that that didn't leave on a good term, and thank God, really, we didn't have an incident, but she was obviously still upset. But and I didn't alert security about it, which I should have. I didn't think she was going to take it there, but she did, in fact, wanted to bring it to church where I was serving. But so how can I incorporate security in an incident like that to make sure that we're safe and I'm safe? Or if there's an incident about to happen, what should, how can I get security on board without causing a disturbance or making, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm going to have parents and all that there. How should I handle this?
I think you handled it well by making security aware that there is a potential threat. So the security at any church or organization, their job is to keep everyone safe in the most non-confrontational way. So their trainings should be how to diffuse situations without causing scenes. So they're supposed to be trained to move like stealth, right? We're not supposed to even really see them or know who all is on security. So you want to make sure, and that's something that should be listed in the policy, but you first want to make sure that you make security aware. Can I speak with someone or whoever that leader, if you have a leader over you, let them know so they can make security aware. If there's a person, we have to have a picture or something like that. But I think you did the right thing by making security aware. And security needs to be made aware so that, one, they don't make anyone feel uncomfortable, but that they're always on guard. And that's why it's very, very important that the people who secure a children's ministry area, they're people who are watchful, paying attention to trends. They should be paying attention to the things that we're paying attention to, and even more than what we're paying attention to. Paying attention to how parents are entreating their children. Paying attention to if a person is in there and they have a child or they don't. So it would be definitely important to bring that to security and let them know if you have a picture of a person, things like that. And in our procedures, parents should know that as well. Because what if a parent, so let's say, for instance, that scenario was a mother who had a boyfriend who they broke up with, and they weren't on the best terms. But the boyfriend was used to being in the home and was around the children. So the children know this person. They call him Uncle So-and-so. And if he now decides to come to church, why are you in the children's ministry area? you have no children with you. So that security, like, so parents should be comfortable to tell us that me and Billy are no longer together. He's not picking up my children or dropping them off. So we need to be aware of that. So you need to make sure you tell security. So I think you did well by letting security know and making sure they're keeping a watchful eye of that. Is again, it's not to try to make other people feel uncomfortable, but they should be trained to operate in a way where they're being watchful enough to be able to get to a person or keep you safe without people noticing that that's what's happening. Did that answer your question?
It does. It does. I'm just trying to figure out how to, because they're there. Sometimes it's, I guess as far as being a coordinator, I am also supervising them and telling them what I need from them. And they're good to do what I'm asking. But the more we're talking now, the more I'm seeing where there are gaps that needs to be covered that, they're not aware of.
Right. And so then you have to whoever's their lead, and these kind of conversations, like there needs to be an understanding of what the needs for your area is and the people who's supplying the need. So you have to know what your needs are, and then you have to be able to articulate them, because sometimes, again, when people come into situations, they're usually just thinking about what works for them. So they may be thinking about what we keep safe. But they may not be thinking about all the other extenuating circumstances that could potentially happen in that area. And if you're serving in that area, you know that, but they may not know that. Okay. So there has to be some.
Okay. I just have one more question as far as documenting incidents. I know where I work, if there's an incident, we have to do like a written documentation of what happened, and who it was reported to and whatever loss occurred. I'm just trying to figure out, how to go about documenting incidents and who do we give that report to?
So every church or organization should have some sort of incident reporting procedure. Again, that's something that would be inside of a policy or procedure manual. And if they don't, if it's an incident where it affects you, always document it yourself. If it's sending an email, that's a paper trail, writing something, keeping some sort of paper trail to where you're documenting what happened. Even if so let's say, for instance, you're serving at a church where they don't have anything officially in place, everybody's kind of all over the place, and you're not sure, worst case scenario, send an email to the pastor or the campus lead or whoever is the director of operations, making sure you're giving an accurate account of what happened or what you experienced. So then that's a paper trail, right? So let's say, for instance, you experience a parent and a husband and wife arguing over a child at church, and there's no particular policy in place. You saw the incident. You need to report that incident. It may not have been anything that you needed to do, but if in the months to come, this mother is putting some sort of suit in place and they say, and it happened at church, they may come to the church and say, are you all aware of any incident that happened here, blah, 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 blah. And then we have the documentation to say, well, we do see this happened at Children's Church on this day, whatever. So always document. If it's something that's concerning you, again, we're not just keeping children safe. We're not just keeping organizations safe. We're keeping adults safe as well. So you want to make sure you document if it's something that happens, something that you feel is incident documenting worthy. Make sure you're sending an email, keeping if there's no specific plan in place, you have to make sure you're documenting those things. But that should be something in your policies. How we handle situations. We do an incident report. We report, we turn it in. Who do we turn it into? Where does it go once we do it? So you have to make sure you're finding those things out, and that will all be in your policies.
What do you think would be the best way to build rapport with parents so that they're comfortable enough to let us know like when changes like that go on, like Billy Bob is not able to pick up the kids anymore because like we're separated or whatever or what have you, but just so that they're comfortable enough with us to be able to like let us know when those things happen, so we don't give the kid who, like, for example, with the kid check, they got the barcode, so if you have a barcode, you scan it, you can take the kid. But or if they have the ticket and then like something I don't know. Never mind.
No, that was actually a good question. And it's a training process. You have to train the people you serve to give you the information you need. Because for most people, some things like that is an afterthought. So I come to church and I'm, all of my issues may be an afterthought. I'm not thinking about those right now. But not paying attention to, I am leaving my child somewhere. So for the school, parents who have children in school, any parents are trained in anything, any change, I have to notify the school. Doctor's appointment, earache, parents let teachers know my child didn't sleep well last night. Parents let teachers know we're going on vacation. So it's all of these things. We just have to train them. And you train them by constantly bringing those things up or even putting those reminders out there. That may be a mainstay poster that stays up. Have you updated your information? Or periodically through the year, make sure you're updating your information. Put that in the newsletter or something like that. You got to keep that information in front of the parents to train them. Just like for you as a teacher, there are things you have to train those parents on information that you need from them, especially if it's not something that's outlined in some sort of a handbook for them. You have to continue to train them on what you need. So you keep bringing it up. You make opportunities for them to do it. You leave things out for them. You have to train those parents to make sure they're aware of what you need from them on an ongoing basis. Does that help? That was helpful? Awesome sauce. Awesome. Any other questions? I hope this has been helpful.
One more. I'm just thinking. We used to have a code word, or just like our own code words that we had in for youth student ministry, and I'm not sure if that's still in place because we've. I think I had to use it once. Thank God. As far as like if a child's missing or so, that no one else knew, which was, kind of our way of doing things. But I don't think everyone knew it across the board, like the other ministries, like security or so, or they weren't aware of it. Is that something that, as far as that's I guess, can be reenacted again, so that we have like our own language?
It's possible. You'd have to check with your student ministry director.
Okay.
That's hard.
I know. What, to have your own language? It worked, actually.
So you have to. It's possible. It's very possible. Anything is possible. I guess for me, I would have to understand what it's for, and it would have to be something that. It'd have to say like what is it for? What would we use a code word for? When is it proper time to use it? Who knows about it? Things like that. And sometimes it may not even be necessary depending on what type of space you have. So like now at Change Church, we have a isolated children's area. In the event that something happens, we can lock doors. So in the event the child is, we can lock ourselves down, things like that. So it just depends. You got to kind of outline what is it for, and that could be something listed in your policies, like, and in the event of a child being lost or whatever. So anything is possible. You just have to. For me, I would have to know what it was for, and if it's necessary. Like, is it something that security comes up with? How is security involved? Is it a procedure that they're putting in place? Because like anything that affects us, they should know about it. They should be included. Like that has to be a relationship that works very, very close together.
Okay.
But again, what happens in most student ministries is because nothing has happened, people take off their mind that something can happen, and we just kind of be going with the motions because there's always so much. It's ever moving. Children's ministry area is such a forever moving area, and people will take for granted that, oh, nothing has happened, or it's not until something happens that people realize, oh, no real process is in place. And that process may be in somebody's head. That process may have not been updated in 5 years, but those things need to continually be updated. And if your organization does not have that in place, champion the cause to make sure something's in place to keep the children safe, to keep the adults safe, and to keep the organization safe. Any more questions? I hope this has been helpful and added value to your life and ministries.
It has.
Awesome sauce. Well, if there are no more questions tonight, again, I want to say thank you so much for being a part of this entire e-course, which has been a mixture of 4 weeks. We've had, I think they've been 4 amazing weeks. I have enjoyed the content. I have enjoyed sharing. Thank you all so much for investing in yourselves and investing in your ministries and your organizations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your feedback. Again, this week I will send out a survey for you to fill out just to give me some feedback on how you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed the class, if it added value to your life and your ministry, and if you would recommend the class to someone else. Again, thank you all so very much. I pray this has added value to your life and ministry. And again, thank you. I am elated that somebody wanted to hear me talk for an hour. So I don't think that much of myself, but I do know God has afforded me some opportunities to learn, to absorb, and to do ministry for quite a while now. So I just know it was nothing but Him pushing me to share that with the world. And I'll continue to do more of that. I do ask that you each keep me in prayer as we push different initiatives through the student ministry consulting so that other churches can be enriched. And it is my passion to see student ministry areas in churches live and be sustainable. Not be rock star organizations, but to live and to be sustainable. So I love you guys so much. Thank you again. You all can look forward to seeing this recording in your email within the next hour or so. Again, thank you all so much. Y'all have an amazing evening. Good night and thanks.
You too. Good night.